Welcome to the Workforce Situation Room, where we spotlight some of the promising and innovative solutions that address some of our most pressing workforce and economic challenges, getting in the way of our mission at Workforce Solutions Borderplex. That mission is to power the people with the tools and opportunity to reach their potential in the workforce, and ultimately, our goal is to develop area businesses and the economy. I'm Bianca, your host, and I stand alongside our ladies of leadership at Workforce Solutions Borderplex with Leila Melendez, our CEO, Alma Aranda, Workforce Development Director, and Karina Castillo, our Senior Research Analyst. In this room, we all believe every situation has a solution. Here's the situation. Is it a worker shortage or is it a wage shortage? It's the economic scuffle heard around the world, and we are going to dig in. So, Karina, if I know nothing about living wage and you want to say, what does $12.51 an hour mean in terms of a living wage in the Borderplex area?
Yes, I'm going to start with the definition. The living wage is the necessary annual income for a household to avoid the public assistance. And like you said, our most current living wage is $12.51. This was calculated in September 2020, and it was based on the census data on the household size here in El Paso County, 3. Based on the family size of 3, we have the MIT calculator that gives you that the necessary annual income is $52,054 for both working 2 adults and 1 child. If you convert to an hourly wage, it's $12.51 an hour, both working.
Okay. You said $52,000 right around? So
Yes.
You're saying each parent needs to at least be making $26,000 a year or $12.51 an hour full-time, 40 hours,
Yes.
right? In order to be at what we define as the living wage, but living wage being that they don't need public assistance, or could we call that above the poverty line? Is that something that we can say?
Yes, it's above the poverty line, but it's only not to avoid, not maybe to have expenses. Is there basic expenses like it's transportation, childcare, food, housing, and other necessities. But it's the basic living wage to be able to live.
Okay, so now that we have that definition figured out and everybody that's listening understands what living wage is, now we can kind of get into the conversation of the wage shortage. So what we started seeing a lot as the economy started to kind of make its way back, and what I mean by that is businesses opening, schools kind of getting back to somewhat normal hybrid versions, we started to see that more businesses needed to hire, and whether actually mostly leisure and hospitality, but people started to have to go back into the office or back into the restaurant or back into the store. So we started noticing across the board, not just in El Paso or the Borderplex, but all across the nation, there's a shortage of workers is what they're calling it. This is what I really think is the most important discussion but why we need to know the definition of living wage. Let's start a little bit with just the minimum wage. Everybody knows the minimum wage right now is $7.25 an hour. And then Leila, the restaurant, the hospitality wage, what is that? $2.13, I think it is, plus tips. So that's the tipped wage. And Karina, just in the Borderplex region, you were talking $12.51 an hour. And that's with the low cost of living. I'm kind of proud of the fact that we have a really low cost of living. So tell me your thoughts, either of you. Tell me your thoughts on that.
Well, the cost of living, sometimes we think we have lower than the other near areas like San Antonio, Dallas, Houston. But if you compare with San Antonio, we're almost the same cost of living. But the reason here is if we compare the wages with San Antonio, it's not almost the same. It's 20% more the wages in San Antonio than here. Because we need to be the employers need to be able to see these competitive wages to be able to keep the talent. And looking at that, like you were saying about having individuals not wanting to work, is because the unemployment benefits. They are receiving $15 an hour and if they work in a restaurant, maybe they will get less and say, I prefer to be in my house, getting this unemployment and not working on this restaurant on this low wage. Because that's why maybe all these employers, hotels, restaurants, the food industry have problems hiring these individuals because they prefer for now living for the unemployment benefits.
It's most definitely a stiff competition for sure. And as far as the restaurant leisure hospitality wage being well below the $12.51 an hour, we have to consider like what are the average wages here? Would you be able to respond to that as far as like jobs that we're seeing and the types of openings that we have?
Well, it depends on the occupation, but if you are a computer occupation, it will be 20, 25, or educational teachers between 20, 25. But on the low wage, like they're working on the ones that were more affected, it's $9 an hour is what they were getting, is the median earnings for those servers or those that work in the hotels are low wages below the living wage. That's that we need to either upskill them for them to get at least $12.51 an hour.
Leila, do you have any thoughts on?
I have a lot of thoughts, so you need to stop me when I need to stop thinking. But I think about the lifespan and the life cycle of an individual and when they enter the workforce and when different points happen in their lives. For example, when I first started working, I was still at home. I was in high school. I was working part-time, but as soon as I graduated high school, I started working full-time and also going to college, but I still lived at home. I didn't have the financial responsibilities and burdens that the head of household has. So below the living wage was okay for me because I was not necessarily a minimum wage, but not much higher than it either. So for my lifestyle at the time, I just needed gas and money to, hang out and things that I needed for myself. I didn't have the responsibility of a mortgage or childcare or a car payment. I just had money for myself. Below a living wage was fine for that period of my life. As I got older and needed more things and then started forming a family, that shifted. The necessity, I had to be increasing my skill set so my skill set could match and demand a higher wage, right? The part of the system that is broken is everybody has those same necessities. Not everybody has the equal access to the resources to move them through that progression. Everybody needs to increase their progression in the wage scale, but not everybody is able to increase their progression in the education scale. And that's where the systems are broken. And COVID has disrupted everything. Just like it disrupted healthcare, it disrupted education, it's also disrupting the business model because so many industries, it's not just one industry or one set of occupations. Many industries, all industries, frankly, are having the same issue with hiring talent at that entry point level because and this is where the disruption of the business model is happening. How were business models able to succeed before? Perhaps they succeeded because of the wage system. But now that wage system is not to their advantage, the success scale is tipping towards more the individual, the workers, even though they may or may not be working. They're the ones, quote unquote, benefiting because they are earning right now a wage that they are able to sustain themselves without having to contribute to the business model. So the business model is struggling. But frankly, we need to have this conversation. We really need to dissect those business models and figure out how can we make both sides work? How can we make the business model work so that it is successful and it sustains? But how do we also make the wage scale work where the individual benefits and they can sustain their life as well? We can have both of those things and have it well, and both sides can be successful. And I think what we're seeing is that maybe for a long time, we thought that both sides were successful. And this has indicated that that's not the case.
I think even before COVID, during like our research into wages and labor market information, we started taking our hottest jobs in the region. Those are the best jobs, right, that are out there, and comparing them to other competing regions, in relation to the brain drain. So we've been talking to employers about this wage disparity. And I mean, I don't think it's unique to our area only. But what I think, though, is COVID, what happened is just kind of, it really unmasked all those things that were kind of ignored or just kind of accepted, or this is the way they are. When we had that labor market roadshow, we were like on a mission to dispel myths, about cost of living compared to San Antonio and so on and so forth. And Karina kind of alluded to the percentage differences. We had done some data early on when COVID impacted our region to look at who was like the labor force and who was being affected, and even their educational levels. And one of the things that was really surprising was you had a lot of people over age 25. I mean, we wanted to not that's not important, but we were excluding the typical college age students who might be affected by layoffs in service industry. But we wanted to look at those that were over 25, and the numbers were really high for very entry level jobs. And I'm sure there was a lot of things going on, but I think also one of those things that ended up happening is when they were laid off, it was also a wake up call for those people that were affected as well to try to find something else that was not as vulnerable. I mean, there's a lot of industries that have entry level occupations at different points. I really do think that there's a lot of people that shifted. I also think that with the access to remote jobs, it's really going to have a lasting impact. I mean, I think we're yet to see the effects. So I think, labor shortage, sure, versus wage shortage, that's definitely something that we're seeing happening right now. And I think with time will reveal exactly what happened. So I think, the immediate is to blame the unemployment insurance benefits. But I really do think that it's beyond that. I think there's just a lot of people who are going to find other opportunities to stay afloat in it. And as remote jobs become a little bit more accessible and it becomes more of a norm, I think that's the pathway that a lot of people are going to go.
I would have to agree to both you, Layla, and Alma. As far as the pivoting, I mean, that's essentially what we dedicated the past 14 months to. Like we are trying to get individuals to reconsider their career, make themselves more marketable, and learn a lot. And I mean, we're shoving it down everyone's throats. Like, get ready to work, level up, upskill, all those terms. So I even know some people personally that decided, I don't want to serve tables anymore. I want to do this and I want to do that, which is great. That was the purpose. So I can definitely say that safely, that without data, that we could attribute to that. And Karina, you mentioned so if somebody was working for $2.13 an hour plus tips forever, and suddenly they're making 15, 17, 19 an hour for the first time in their lives, maybe they're finally not struggling to survive, and it's a quick breather. That's a factor
for a short
sure.
Time.
Yes, for a short time though, that's a factor for sure. I wouldn't call it laziness. I personally wouldn't judge it as laziness, because it's like you struggle your entire life and you get a breather of sustainable living and even a quality of life, maybe, where you actually got to do enjoyable things.
I actually think they might be catching up for a lot of lost time. I know I've seen this in articles and in some data and on news stories, and then anecdotally from people that I know that are still getting their benefits. They're paying off loans. They're paying off car notes. They're trying to fix their credit because they know that the window is closing. So they're using it to their best advantage. And so it actually, frankly, might be helping the economy, because guess what? They are paying for certain things. They are still buying goods and services with that money. So not only are they staying afloat and buying food and buying clothes for their family that they need during this time while they're not employed. But guess what? They're buying food and they're buying clothes and they're buying services. So they're still contributing to the economy anyway. They're buying those goods and services from other businesses of people that are working. So it's still contributing to the economic cycle anyway. Folks now it's apparent that even though folks were working for many years and not making a living wage. We know that there are individuals that are working and are still on SNAP and food stamps or still on other government services. So how does that happen, right? Just because you have a job doesn't make that good enough. That's not check mark successful. You have a job, you're good. No, that's a fallacy. That is not correct. And I think as society, we have seen it that way. If you're employed, you're good. If you're unemployed, it's bad. That's not enough. You can be employed and underpaid, underemployed, under the living wage. So a job by itself is not a measure of success. There are other things. There's livability and sustainment and education, all of those things that come with a good quality of life besides just, do you have a job? Yes or no?
Absolutely. And it's crazy that you said the word cycle, because back down to the living wage that Karina was talking about, to be $12.51 an hour so that a family could stay above the poverty line or not have to rely on benefits, right? The actual definition. But let's say that a person, like Layla says, just gets a job and it's checkmark, you have a job. Well, you have a job that pays $8 an hour and both mom and dad are getting paid $8 an hour. So maybe it's not the $52,000, and I'm not going to be able to do my math that quickly, but it's well below $52,000. And so people are you're hearing this like, well, employers can't pay this much, and it's got to come from somewhere though, and it's going to come from benefits, right? In order for them to make up for the shortage in wages, they're going to have to apply for benefits, whether it's SNAP, TANF, or whatever types of support they're getting. And that's somebody still has to pay for that. So regardless, it's going to come out of somewhere. And if we want to follow the money, who's paying for that at the end of the day? If it's coming out of tax dollars that are coming out of whether property taxes, income taxes, whatever, it's still coming out of our pockets. And if people are going to complain that Chipotle is $10 for a burrito versus $7, well, that's going to come out of your pocket too. So would you rather eat a burrito or would you rather somebody make sure a family eats?
And even the government, there's this whole, cliff effect theory, but to your point, Bianca, if you take two working adults who are making minimum wage, that's barely over $30,000 a year. So, as Liz was saying, like, sure, you can check the box that they're employed, but they're going to be struggling. We know that for sure. And the service industry is a big portion of economic development and quality of life for a region. But I also think it's important to note, I think out of all the industries that are complaining, finding workers the most, it's those industries and those, and maybe it's the occupations that pay the least. It's not, it's not a phenomenon to say that servers or cashiers or like all those like minimum wage jobs. Yeah, I think they're going to struggle, but I think it's because, again, I think that's something that we're going to have to look at. And the idea that employers could pay, under $3 because they're going to make it up in tips. That's great, when that happens, but we also know that that's not always the case. Mm-hmm. So whether they're reporting or not, or, you can add all these different variables to that, but that's why, I think these industries and these specific occupations are going to struggle.
You're right. And I think if we're talking about employers starting to pay enough and talking about the fact that the business models are broken that Layla mentioned, just the misalignment of all of the channels coming in, where it's coming from workers, coming from wages and employers themselves. It's almost like there is a way to have both. There is a way to have a balance. And because for the past 14, 15 months, employers have been uncomfortable, it should be considered that employees have been uncomfortable. Their families have been uncomfortable for a lot longer than 14, 15 months. So that's something that I think we also need to consider. Does anyone else have any other gripes to put out so we can start maybe thinking about potential solutions?
Yeah, I think, you mentioned right now the cycle, right? So we as society will complain that we don't want to pay for a $10 Big Mac. Guess what? We're paying a $10 Big Mac at least to the government in our taxes. We're paying for that somewhere. We're either paying for it directly and by the way, when we pay the government, we pay for them. We also pay for somebody to process the benefit. So we're paying like twice. right? We're not just paying that money directly to support the person. We're paying for somebody to process the payment to support the person and the building that person sits in and all of that stuff, all of that overhead versus just pay the $10 Big Mac and you enjoy the Big Mac and somebody can enjoy a good home when they get home from that shift. So it goes somewhere. It's for us as a society, how we perceive the success, where we perceive success and where we perceive people need to be on this side or that side of the line.
Absolutely. I mean, you talk about paying the government. Just look at what the Workforce Commission's internet and phone bills were in the past 14 months, trying to accommodate everybody's claims and trying to push it through, working 24/7 to try to answer all of it. Those were salaries. Those were salaries that we had to pay as a society. So you're absolutely right. Sorry, Alma, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think along the wage issue and all of that, I think what we're really going to see a shift is, I want to use like something that I read recently. The yardstick has changed as far as what a good job is, what a good employer is, an employer of choice. And in addition to the wage factors, I mean, and I know it's not an easy thing for some businesses or some industries to kind of delve into, but I think as a community we can share resources, because I think that along the wages, I mean, there's other factors that are still going on, the flexibility, of schedules, and there's still a lot of aftermath going on with COVID. Children, yes, schools reopened, and I know we're already going into summer, but as far as, are kids going to go back to school in the summer? Are they going to do virtual work? Are they not? The issue with childcare, all of those things are still really big factors. You add the wage situation on top, and you can see why for some people it's just not really feasible or attractive at all, to put it simply.
So within our wheelhouse, and I mean, I know that there's a lot to consider, especially on the business versus employee model. Just some stats that I've seen. I started following Dan Price from Seattle, just like the statistics of what I've seen between the growth of CEO pay versus employee pay. Like the percentage contrast is mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. You're talking millions and millions more than the average worker. And I mean, it's just not, that's something obviously that's not within our wheelhouse, but I had to put that out there because that kind of blew my mind. But as far as stuff that we can do within our wheelhouse, we've already started doing it with our upskilling and just trying to push more individuals into higher paying jobs, which is something I think that we're succeeding in and we're doing a good job at. But what other potential ways that we can address bringing wages up? And I know this is something that started a couple of years back already, where you kind of just started opening up employers' eyes to this, but maybe you guys can talk to us a little bit about what that was, where I remember seeing a flyer. What do you pay? Are you paying enough? Tell us a little bit about how that project started and maybe how we can revive it.
I think the number one thing is awareness. I think employers, myself included as an employer, is awareness and always understanding where your talent is coming from and know your competition when it comes to talent. Don't assume that your line of thinking is going to be accurate, and especially over a long period of time. I think here in El Paso, what that study showed us is that we have a behavior that we knew was started many years ago, and we just enabled it to continue because of our own lack of awareness and lack of proving it with data. So I think business owners need to always assume that it's always good practice to check yourself. Don't assume that this is an accurate way to pay employees. You should find a way to always measure yourself against your industry and against the market, and not just the competitor across the street, but the competitor now, frankly, around the world. COVID has absolutely indicated that. And if you as an employer are not realizing that your future talent pool, or your current talent pool for that matter, your current workforce has access to a worldwide job market, you need to compete with that. How are you going to keep your best and brightest? And it's not just what is tangible and in front of you, it's around the world. So I think businesses need to, one, admit that and be aware and say, yep, things have changed and I'm not quite sure how I understand or that I understand how things have changed. So then we can provide those resources and we can provide the data to say, here's what we can tell you. Here's what we can share with you, and just give you information so that you can educate yourself as a business owner and say, this is what I know. Now I know what I didn't know, and I can move forward from this point on. So the first thing is, I think I really encourage people to challenge themselves and get away from their own status quo thinking. Those anecdotes, those myths. What is a myth? Or, get outside of your own close circle. You've got to have conversations outside. And I encourage you all to challenge that thinking. And it's painful. Nobody wants to admit, I've been wrong all this time. Yeah. And maybe you weren't wrong at the beginning, but 10 years later, if you haven't checked that wage scale, and if you haven't looked at your wage scale over the last 5 years, it's completely obsolete. So as a business owner, you need to do that at least annually. Now, at least annually. But that's something you need to always keep your temperature on, is what are the wages in this occupation and for this industry, and that's something that you have to build into your business plan. If the last time you looked at your wages was when you started your business plan, and that was 10, 15 years ago, you should be updating your business plan anyway. So those are all constant things. Those are constant living things. Your staffing table with the wages and the skills that are necessary to do those jobs, those are living documents that need to be looked at and evaluated at least annually.
You might not see it directly in the wages. There might be some hesitation, but they need to also take a look at the savings, or if you want to put it as an expense, of what retention and turnover really can cost an employer. That is really, really expensive. And even though it might be, entry level work or you think easily replaceable, you're still losing, knowledge and skills. And that's going to have a very direct effect on your business. You're just not seeing it directly as wages, but you're going to see it in your operation. And so to Layla's point, I think one of the things that we've done, we're able to do is an employer can call and ask us for labor market information to say, what is this occupation paying? What entry, middle, and experience wages? Or, we can look at several occupations or in the industry and compare not just in our region, but really anywhere now, as Layla pointed out. So I think those are really important factors that employers also need to acknowledge when they're trying to, before they dismiss saying, I can't afford to pay those wages. I think that it's important to look at it that way, because I think they're paying for it in other ways as well.
Definitely. It definitely benefits to paying the living wage. But I just thought of an idea. But what if we had like labor market mixers, like parties where we kind of just gave data to business owners and made it fun, but just say, hey, but kind of also have that group influence of like everybody having the discussion in a lighthearted manner.
I'm all for that. I also think we could do, and the idea behind those postcards was like a labor market hotline, right? Mm-hmm. Is that nobody wants to admit that they don't know what they should be paying for this job. So I get it. I don't need to call you out on it. I'm not trying to embarrass you. So call the labor market hotline and ask, how much should I pay for this job? Fine. Here's where you should be, right? And if you're not there, then we can help you in a further conversation. I'll give you an example of something that we did to kind of spur this conversation and went along with this wage report. But we have our job centers and we have staff that work there, mm-hmm. and we have our hot jobs. So we bought T-shirts. We bought black T-shirts and we put in big white bold letters on the front. It said, a computer analyst gets paid, or whatever the job was or the occupation was on the front. On the back, in huge white letters, it said, $28 an hour, or whatever that wage was. Now, that was raw data, like real data that we did from the Bureau of Labor Statistics for El Paso. This was labor market data. It wasn't just anecdotal. And we put those t-shirts on our staff at the centers. So when people would come into the centers and they'd be interested in talking to somebody about a job, they'd see those t-shirts and they'd be like, whoa, that's what those jobs are paying. Yeah, that's a hot job. Let's sign you up for a training so you can get onto that pathway, right? But here's what happened. One of those employees, after work, he went to the grocery store in his t-shirt. And somebody came up to him and the job on the t-shirt said information specialist, like an IT specialist. Hey, I'm an IT specialist. I don't get paid $17 an hour. That's not true. And our staff said, yeah, it is. And you should be paid $17 an hour. And the other guy looked at him like deer in the headlights, like, whoa. And that's the awareness that has happened now on the worker side. They know their worth. Now the employers are faced with that shock of, oh, that's what they're worth. Yeah. So now we have to find that middle ground. So we can provide that information to the employers and say, no judging, this is where you should be. And then from there, we can help you figure out different ways to get you there. It's going to be hard for any business to just do that overnight and say, boom, 20% wage across, increase across the board. That's hard to do, but there's strategies for that. And some of the strategies that I've seen happen in other organizations is you build it in over time. You look at who is furthest from the middle, get those people up first in one period. And then the next period, then you start to move everybody from the middle point upward, right? So there's different strategies, and you can do some things earlier, some like a short-term strategy, a mid-term, and a long-term, right? Because it does take a long time for that, so that nobody goes without anything for a long time, but then you end up giving more to the furthest behind so that they can catch up faster. So it's a catch-up process, and then eventually you try to get everybody to around the same place. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody gets the same price, right? That's based on different occupation levels, education levels, experience, et cetera. So there are still different factors. But that's a wage study that we can help employers do. And there are businesses and consultants that are experts in this field that actually do this and can help businesses look at their staffing table and come up with those wage scales.
So we can hit it from both ends, but making the employers more aware, but also that's a great story. The IT specialist at the grocery store, educating them to say, hey, boss, you need to pay me $10 more an hour or whatever, because teaching negotiation strategies on top of that. And actually it's something that we do with our ready to work stuff in our career navigators and solutions crew. So this is just kind of putting a little bit of a personal challenge. We're dealing with employers that are willing to listen, willing to, think about things and willing to be educated. But in the past 2 months alone, the conversations that have come up for me have been with business owners who have their arms crossed about, this is the mentality, I worked hard and they need to work just as hard mentality, and just really stubborn with the goggles of that they don't have the same ethic. The individual's not wanting to work, the individual's not willing to accept less than what they feel they're worth. I think that's our biggest problem. Because you can always make changes with people willing to make change. How do we even begin to scratch at the surface of that employer population where stubborn might be a word, but we're all cabezonas. That's okay. I think that's an attribute sometimes. But how would we even begin to talk to business owners who look at it as if they don't deserve it? Not because they are incapable, but I
just wanted to give you an example. We did a supply chain analysis because sometimes the employer says, I'm not going to pay that $17 an hour for an engineer. Mm-hmm. But let me tell you, we did the analysis and 70% of the engineers are hired outside this region. So even though you are not paying like local talent here, hiring a local talent and providing good wages, giving the good wages to the employees, they say, I'm not going to pay here, but I'm going to hire a consultant company from Houston. That Houston company has maybe an individual that graduated from UTEP and is earning a very good wages in Houston, San Antonio. And then we are paying extra, double for this engineer that we need for our company. So sometimes we need to look at the data, understand that we need to increase the wages to keep the talent.
Agreed. So data is one way to just keep feeding it.
Yeah. And I think ultimately we can educate and we can inform and we can provide the data. I think ultimately that business owner is they're going to come to a decision point. Am I going to be able to sustain my business model being sticking to my guns, right? Sticking to my guns, to my principles. If I did this, then I expect everybody else to the same standard. Fine. Everybody has the right to do that. You own that. You own the consequences of that. Whether if you don't adapt, then the business that you have is going to reflect that. And that's the culture that's going to be within your organization. And that's the brand and that's the name that comes with your organization. Fine. The ones that adapt and say, I'm going to do this different. I'm going to be agile and I'm going to go with the flow, right? Whether I like it or not, whether I agree or not, whether this is how I was raised and grown up, whatever. But if you're willing to be agile and be uncomfortable, then you're going to have a different success. Personally speaking, my upbringing and what I went through, I can't expect. Yeah, do I want everybody to have had the same cookie cutter Layla? No, that's life. Life is different, right? It's easy for me to relate to people that did it exactly like me, but that doesn't mean it's impossible for me to relate and for me to just accept that somebody else has a different value and different talents and different beliefs than I do. And that's okay. My responsibility to the organization is to be open to that and let that naturally happen versus just saying, nope, this is just my belief. And this is just because I said so. Because I said so. Well, if fine, because you said so, then you're going to have to own what comes with that. So I think at the end of the day, you're only going to be able to do so much, right? And we can only help whether it's businesses or whether it's workers. Same conversation you can have for people, whether they choose to go back to school or get educated again or reskilled, etc. It's that there's a decision point into how much of this are you willing to let go of and be agile and improve your organization or improve yourself.
Yeah, it's not just Layla's world, it's everyone's world, that you have to accept.
Even before COVID, when the unemployment was really low, there was a labor shortage. And there's a lot of different factors that are going into that, as far as, and certain industries were getting hit harder. For example, the trades, construction, things like that. But I think what kind of has accelerated all of this, of course, is COVID. But, some of the things I've seen in articles and just different posts that I've seen where employees are kind of also judging what they experienced with their previous employer when times were tough, right? Things like that. And there's a little bit of that. And so I think just the work shift culture is changing. And if anything, it was already changing. Back to the shirts that Layla was talking about, there was one, like a carpenter. typically a lot of young people don't see a carpenter as a very sexy job, but the wages were great. Really, really high wages. So there was a little bit of all of that going on. I just think the pandemic has really accelerated all of that time. But also I think there's a little bit of resistance and almost kind of shaming people for not wanting to go back to work and trying to take advantage of unemployment insurance benefits. I think there's going to be a backlash of that as well. And coincidentally, even, as part of a board, in the state of Texas, there's a Texas Workforce Commission, and I'm sure other states had other things. There was a lot of free training opportunity to kind of level up. I mean, that is what we do, right? We provide resources. So it's going to be interesting to see how many people took advantage. I mean, some of the numbers that are being reported are, really, really high numbers. And that's a different set of skill set that people are accessing now. And it could really just kind of shift what they're willing to work at versus what they were willing to work at prior to COVID. So I think all of those things are really important variables. Yet, one thing I did want to share is not because we were providing a solution, but just kind of wanting to have a discussion and providing bringing in some resources through one of our roundtables in partnership with the chambers. We're going to be kind of hosting different viewpoints from different industries and different sizes, just to kind of share what they're doing to try to, make themselves attractive to their employees, sustain, and just kind of give us some feedback and share with other ones. Because I think one of the things, like Layla said, maybe they don't want to ask because they're embarrassed to ask or whatever. But I think maybe kind of providing this platform, they just don't know. We have we have so many small employers. We know that they work really hard as business owners and they're doing everything to survive. And maybe they just haven't had the time to invest in, those business plans and research and stuff like that. But that's something that we're going to be working on over the next couple of weeks and offer that up to all of our regional businesses.
That's good to know. This for me comes down to like a survival of the fittest viewpoint. Employers having to accept that maybe they've been underpaying for workers this entire time, and it's just this reality check. And like Layla mentioned, the culture is just going to shift that way, and it's really up to them what they want to do, but will their business survive? So that's really important to consider. But at the same time, on the other side of the token, employees are also going to have to survive this. And like you said, Alma, they had a lot of opportunity in the past 14 months, and it wouldn't even be, it's an issue of not so much time or not having the time to get the training, but an issue of maybe discipline in some cases. So it is going to be the Darwin effect, survival of the fittest. But I'm going to try to close this up since we're rounding up on the hour. I want to hear everybody's feedback on the end of the pandemic benefits coming up. And that's starting to sprout up all over the country. And Texas is hitting their end come June 26th. What are we expecting as a workforce development board, and how are we responding to that?
Well, we've been waiting. There were several times throughout the year where the benefits were either about to run out or we knew there was a deadline and then they got extended. So we've been preparing for this, for like a wave of people throughout the year, and we've adapted our systems to accommodate that large number. Fortunately, throughout the year, at the very first time that we saw these numbers, we were expecting like 100,000 people that were on unemployment to call us. Over the year, people have been reemployed. It's going to be interesting to see exactly who comes off of the unemployment benefit and where they will start to look for jobs. It's hard to say, and it's hard to assume that a person that was in fast food or service industry last year is still going to be looking for fast food service industry this year. They might not. I really don't know. It's going to be hard to tell. It's going to take some time in the data to see where everybody ends up. But we are well prepared with our phone system, with our centers, with our pop-ups, with accessibility, all of those things to support people, whether they want to be looking for work from home, look for work that they can do at home, like remote work, or if they want to come to a centers, or if they want to meet us at another facility or go through one of our partners, et cetera. So we're ready for all of those individuals when they start to look. And they don't all need a person to help them. We have a lot of automated systems that can help them, that they won't have to be standing in line or waiting on hold for many hours. So our systems are very, I think, fortunately, I'll say pretty modern, but not so modern that they won't be able to talk to a live person if they want to. So we're ready. We're ready for the service. We're ready to point people in the right direction. And And there's a lot of jobs to be had. So I think my own personal opinion is we will have people that their benefits will end, and they will quickly be able to find jobs, at least to keep them afloat, to have an income. But I think between now and maybe even the next few years, there will be people making jumps from jobs to jobs, because there's going to be a desire to move up as much as possible. So I think, somebody might say, I just need to get a job today just because my benefits are running out. I'm going to go work at this restaurant. But while I'm there, I'm going to keep my eyes open for other things. And then they'll jump if there's another opportunity. So I think that that's going to be happening for quite a bit some time. It's going to be a money game. And if people will move for a quarter or 50 cents more, $1 more, etc. I think that's going to be happening in the market for at least a short time.
Right now, they have two options: either continue with the employment benefits or work. After the benefits end, they only want to have one option: going to work. And while Leila said, if they opted, they only have to either working or upskilling. They have to decide for the future. They have to know what is the best for their family, and they need to think right now for like in the next months that what they're going to be in their life to have a quality of life. So they have to either upskills or working and trying to be upgrading and having a better job.
Maintaining what they had
and
with the higher pay, with benefits. And it's almost like you can't go backwards. Once you've got a taste, once you got a view of that height, I would hope that they want to maintain that, and that's enough motivation to continue the upskilling and to find a job that better suits their quality of life, their desired quality of life.
I was going to share, 25 states are halting or stopping the emergency benefits. But it's important to also remember, granted that extra $300 is really, it can make a really big difference for a family, but the regular state unemployment benefits aren't necessarily going away either. So I think that's important to kind of factor in. So the effect of the 300, we've been bracing ourselves over the last, year and a half for this like influx of, and this rush, but we'll see how this kind of really, what trickles down and how it affects our services. But as Leila said, I feel that we are very prepared, and there are a lot of, like Leila said as well, opportunities out there for somebody just to get a job while they're trying to figure out what they're going to do. But I think also something really interesting, and I've been seeing a lot, and the data it's very new, and there's not a lot of really great data on it. But when you're looking at mixed earners or poly work, or people who have a job and then do some like gigs on the side, that got really popular over the last year or two. And so I think that's going to have a big effect as well. So I think again, when you're looking at freelance jobs and these different gigs and people being able to do having different skill sets and just offering things like that, I think those are going to have really, really big effects down the line. But as far as the ending of the pandemic, I think it's important to remember they're losing the federal benefit, not necessarily the state benefit, but I feel we're prepared to see.
Awesome. Thank you. And we invite any other workforce development boards or economic development organizations to provide their ideas and their plans and strategies for the end of their benefits. I didn't know it was 25 states that were doing it, but yeah, it looks like we're heading towards the end. The light at the end of the pandemic tunnel is coming, but now we're dealing with a new a new situation, but we'll be ready. All right. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As we close out the Workforce Situation Room, I did want to bring up a quick topic that I didn't get to mention earlier in the conversation when all the girls were here. The living wage that Karina mentioned had to do with a family of 3 consisting of 2 parents and 1 child. And we're talking $12.51 an hour for each parent working full time. I think we strongly need to consider that the living wage changes from family to family, especially when it comes to single mothers, single fathers, single parents, and having more than one child. So if you have a, say, for example, single mom with 3 kids, that's a family of 4 with 1 salary. And that quick math right there should tell you how important this conversation is when it comes to living wage. A lot of our discussion came from anecdotal conclusions that we gather from some of this data and some of the trends, and oftentimes things that we see within our centers and our customers. But it's the immersion of these thoughts and conclusions coming from different backgrounds and understandings and even levels of compassion that leads to finding the ultimate solution. In this case, we're trying to solve the shortage of workers and wages in a manner that fairly accommodates employer and employee. At Workforce Solutions Borderplex, we believe that to fix that worker shortage we were talking about, we do need to fix the wage shortage. If you agree or disagree, we want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments, and if you have solutions yourself that have worked with this particular topic, let us know. We don't always have a choice in the situations we face, but you do have a choice in subscribing to Solutions. Join the Workforce Situation Room on your favorite podcast platform and hit subscribe, where you'll find a solution to every situation.